Carson back in the third. It were not long. Carson's still carried by.
Wait, it's probably in the middle or something.
Huh?
I would wait to write it.
Well,
Too bad.
and they used to put it.
Okay. And kick him.
I did. That's why Eagles Continent has provided for me.
I don't feel the exterior.
Anything that
Is he fine paper?
Really bad.
Fine paper?
Yeah,
Is he? Are you
fine.
paper?
you know.
Rose shit.
Oh wow. Wow.
Would you die right now?
Oh, are you happy?
When?
Dual flip.
Yes. Go back to when. Remember that one office?
It was
Office.
long. 5 hours practicing on.
You've never, I've never seen like clips of it. Have you seen like the ones where it's like Michael's on the roof and like dual flip?
You couldn't do it.
Okay. Yes, open up your notes, please. We will be getting into this in
I
note
would
more
have
notes.
to like, I would have to like.
Carson's here. Kellen,
A limerick that no one can be.
Veronica, Hunter,
Yeah.
Adam, Adam, Dawson.
I don't think my times are that bad anymore. I've converted on the Twitter.
Brian,
Easier, less
John, Nathan.
the same.
No, Nathan.
Think about the grind, brother.
Isabel. Noah. Neil. Here. Carson.
Yep.
Emerson.
Here.
Gavin.
Yeah.
Jack.
Here.
Grace.
Here.
Vance.
Here.
Jasmine.
Here.
Garrett.
Here.
Noah.
Here.
And Alex. So Alex.
I'm also really
Okay.
tired and off my head.
Alright, so let's see, Friday
Alright.
we did the trials or whatever for the rubber band race cars. Hopefully your group went on Friday and everything went well. I know there's still a couple of groups that still need to like show me the whole 1 meter thing.
I didn't go. My partner has a car,
Okay. Well,
and she's
Hopefully
gone.
hopefully she'll be back tomorrow and you can show me tomorrow
Okay.
or something.
Um,
But anyway, if you still need to show me, if you have your car handy, you will get some work time today on a little section review toward the end here. So if you need to like set up a quick trial and show me quick, we can make it work during that time. But otherwise, we are going to keep moving here with chapter 5. We'll get through 2 sections today, and there's only 1 more section after that. So we will get through this chapter in the next couple days. There's not a whole lot left to it, honestly. So the first sections we did were like velocity, acceleration, kind of tracking motion. Now we're looking at forces, which are the things that cause motion. So what is a force? Simply put, a force is a push or a pull. Okay. Now, one important thing, like velocities, a force is a vector, meaning it has both size and direction. Remember, velocity is like 50 meters per second to the east or west, or I have to have a direction with it, right? If I don't specify direction, it is simply a speed then, right? Force is the same way. So you could push with 50 pounds of force, but you can push up, you can push down, you can push left, right, at some angle, whatever. You push in a direction. that's different than like, so that's a vector. A scalar is something that doesn't have a direction. So like your mass, for example. If you have a mass of 100 kilograms, that's it, right? You don't have like 100 kilograms to the west. That makes no sense. Same thing, like time. Time does not have a direction. It's just a scalar. So we wouldn't say like, well, I waited for 1 hour to the east. Like it's just I waited for an hour. That's it. The unit of force is the Newton. The capital N shows a Newton. Okay. It's named after Sir Isaac Newton, who did a lot of the pioneering work with like finding these equations for these calculations. But it is a Newton. I'll show you a little bit later what a Newton actually breaks down into. But it is the Newton. And then finally, the net force. Remember, net force, and really this is the same as like a net anything. It's the combination of all the forces, right? So it's like what's left over in the end. So it'd be like, I don't know, let's say you bought an ice cream truck, right? And let's say you're driving around town, you're selling ice cream, and you have sold $5,000 worth of ice cream this month. Well, think, did you make $5,000? Not necessarily, right? I mean, you would have had to, first of all, buy your ice cream. You probably had to buy the truck, right? So you'd have to take that $5,000, maybe you subtract off, $2,000 worth of what you paid for the ice cream, maybe another $1,000 for your monthly payment for the truck. So now you're up to $3,000 in expenses, which means you made $2,000, right? Like your net income was $2,000. And that's not even counting for gas, whatever. But if we add everything up at the end, that is your net income. If we're talking about how much you, like that $5,000, you might have heard this term. You ever heard of like gross income before? Okay, the gross is like before you deduct any of your expenses, that's how much you cleared. Yeah. So in this case, if I get really touchy, I have to like restart it like every period. Give me a second. So I can make the touchscreen function back. So if I'm pushing with, I'll just draw it here, use a box as an example instead of drawing a piano. So think if this box is being pushed with 500 newtons to the left, and let's say its friction is resisting that push with 400 newtons to the right, what is the net force acting on that box? 100 newtons, what direction?
Left.
To the left. I have to specify direction, right? So I could say 100 newtons left, or if I call left a negative, well in that case, and we can call either way negative, doesn't matter, but as long as we're consistent with it. If I'm calling to the left negative and to the right is then positive, because it's the opposite, now think negative 500 plus 400, I would get negative 100, right? So, either way, whether I say 100 newtons to the left, that's fine. If I said negative 100 newtons, the negative is indicating the direction, left. So, we commonly use a positive and negative to indicate directions in 2 dimensions. All right. So, if we have forces that are acting in the same direction, so let's say he's pushing with 300 newtons, and they're pulling with 1,200, what would the net force be on this piano? 1,500 newtons to the left. Or, we could say, if we're calling left negative, well now negative 1,200 plus negative 300, I get negative 1,500, right? Either way, it's indicating left in that case. Okay, so if I have a balanced force just essentially means the net force equals 0. So if the forces are balanced, then the net force is 0. So these do not produce a change in motion. I want to be clear on this though, because there's a common misconception, and people read that as they don't move. And that's not the case. They just don't produce a change in motion. Okay? So certainly, if I'm trying to pull like this countertop, right? I'm trying to pull it, it's anchored to the floor. So if I pull with 1,000 newtons, it's going to pull back with 1,000 newtons. Thus, net force is 0 and it will not move, right? On the other hand, like let's say I'm in my car, driving down a straight road, and I set my cruise control to like, let's say I'm on the highway, I set it to 60 miles per hour. Well, think, in that case, is there still like air resistance trying to slow my car down? Yes. Is my engine still running and like propelling me forward? Yes. But the two forces are neutralizing each other, right? They're canceling each other out. So in that case, my net force is 0, and that's why I just stay 60 miles per hour. I don't speed up, I don't slow down, I just stay moving at that constant speed. Does that make sense? So, just because the net force is 0, again, that doesn't mean the object will not move. It just means whatever it's doing, when the net force equals 0, that's what it's going to keep doing. So if it was stationary, it's going to stay still. If it was already moving in one direction, it's going to stay moving in that direction. It's not going to stop. If we get to an unbalanced force, now we produce a change in motion. So if I want to speed up, I hit my gas pedal, right? Maybe I need to I'm passing a car or something like that. When I hit my gas, all of a sudden now my engine is providing more thrust or propulsion than the air resistance is resisting me, and I will start to speed up. My motion changes. On the other hand, if I hit the brakes, now I'm adding more friction, right? So now I've got more friction than my engine is propelling me forward. Probably not propelling me at that point, but all of a sudden I've tipped the balance. The frictional forces are greater. I will start to slow down. Okay. When every time we say a change in direction, or a change in motion, I should say. So change in motion, I could really call that an acceleration. So you can think of it like unbalanced forces produce an acceleration. Because that is what a change in motion is, right? It's either going to change your speed or it's going to change your direction. That changes your motion. So when we talk about acceleration, remember in that case, any acceleration, the unit is a meter per second, right? Or meter per second squared. So if I hit my gas pedal and I start speeding up, as long as I'm doing that, if I'm accelerating at 3 meters per second squared, well then every second I do that, I'm going to go 3 meters per second faster, right? So after 1 second, I'll be 3 meters per second faster. After 2 seconds, I'll be 6 meters per second faster. After 3 seconds, I'll be 9. After 4, I'll be 12, and 15, and so forth. So you're not just moving, you're accelerating. Or maybe perhaps, remember we don't really talk about decelerating, but slowing down would be like a negative acceleration. Okay, but it's not just changing, it's the rate of change is increasing in either direction if you're accelerating. Okay. So how do we calculate a force? A force is simply a mass undergoing any acceleration. If you've ever been in a car, when you hit the brakes or you hit the gas pedal, in that case, there is an unbalanced force, right? That causes an acceleration or a negative acceleration. We call it deceleration. I you feel that force, right? So if you hit the gas pedal, you kind of get pushed back into your chair a little bit. You feel that force. You hit the brakes, you kind of get pushed maybe forward, kind of like in your seatbelt. You feel that force. So there's an acceleration acting on your mass, resulting in an actual force that you can feel. So force equals mass times acceleration. Really, really simple equation, but a really important one. This is essentially Newton's second law. We'll get to Newton's laws later. So, the unit of mass, if you remember, is a kilogram. Like we already said, the unit of acceleration is a meter per second, or a meter per second squared, right? So, if I combine those units, I get a kilogram times a meter per second squared. So, a kilogram meter per second squared. That is what a Newton actually is. So, when you're calculating these things, you don't magically get a capital N in your answer. Your units will end up being kilogram meter per second squared, which is a Newton. Okay, we just call it a Newton because instead of constantly saying kilogram meter per second squared all the time, it's just a shortened kind of abbreviated unit. Make sense? Real quick, algebra check. This is really simple, but I want to make sure we're all good with this. If I wanted to solve for acceleration in that equation, algebraically, how would I solve for acceleration? Yeah, divide by mass, right? So think, if I'm multiplying here, the opposite of multiplication is division. So I divide by m on both sides. That'll cancel these out, and I'll be left with acceleration equals force divided by mass. If I was trying to solve for mass, I would just divide by acceleration, right? So when you use this equation, you will know 2 out of the 3. You will have to find the third one. If you're trying to find force, well, easy peasy, because then it's just plug your values in and that's it. If you know the force and you know the mass, and you're trying to find the acceleration, then you have to just solve. So in that case, you divide the force divided by mass. If you do the force and acceleration, you're trying to find mass, divide the force by the acceleration. Yeah, pretty simple algebra. Okay. Last thing to talk about today is friction. Okay, so friction, it is the force that opposes motion between two surfaces. Okay, two surfaces that are in contact with each other. Now, what causes friction? If they're talking about like two hard surfaces, even like your desk, I know it feels fairly smooth, but if you were to like zoom in on it with especially like an electron microscope, you're going to see what looks smooth is actually, it would look like a little mountain range. Okay, you have all these little peaks and valleys, and it actually is fairly rough on the microscopic level. So everything has a bit of roughness to it. Okay, we can't make anything perfectly smooth. And it's when we rub those surfaces across each other, it's going to make one of these objects kind of like ride up and down in those little bumps, or maybe just break them off and then shear them off. And that the actual force requires to break all those tiny little bits. That is the friction force acting on us. That's why if you constantly, if I take 2 blocks of wood, right, even without sandpaper, if I took 2 blocks of wood and just rub them together for a long, long time, they're going to get very smooth, right? Because I just keep breaking off little bits until I'm smoothing them out. But it is that kind of roughness, even on the microscopic level, that causes this friction. Now, when we talk about friction, we have 2 types. We have kinetic friction, and we have static friction. So, kinetic friction is when 2 surfaces are moving. If it's static friction, now it's between surfaces that are not yet moving. So, if we're talking like the friction of your tires on the road is when you're driving, that would be, of course, kinetic friction, right? Because you're moving, the tires are moving, rubbing against the road. Static friction, on the other hand, is like when you're pushing on something or pulling on something, but it's not moving yet. Okay? So, for example, like those, like let's say the carts, right, for the tools, they're really heavy. There's a lot of weight in those things. If I brought in I brought my son Wyatt in, he's like a year and a half. And I told him, like, Wyatt, grab that cart, bring it to Daddy. He's gonna try, right? He's gonna push on that thing. Is it gonna move? Probably not. He's stout, but he's not that strong. So it's not that he's not pushing on it, right? He's pushing, but the static friction, like the friction that he's trying to overcome to get it to move, it's too great. Okay? If you went over there and I said, bring that cart to me, in that case, you'd grab that cart. At first, you'd have to pull quite hard, right? But eventually, you would get it to budge and it would start to move. At that moment when it was like, I'm pulling but it's not moving, and all of a sudden like, oh, I get it to budge loose, you went from fighting static friction to kinetic friction. This is not written on the board, but jot this in your notes. Of the two, static is always greater. Static friction is always stronger than kinetic friction. You've all felt this before. Like, if you've ever been trying to like move a heavy toolbox or like slide a sled or something like that, or push a car that's stalled or whatever. You're trying to push something heavy, move a fridge. It's like you really have to fight to get it to move, but as soon as it starts to move, you kind of feel that like release a little bit, right? It's easier to keep it moving than it was to get it to move in the first place. And that's because at first you're fighting static friction, which is always stronger. As soon as it budges, though, now you're only fighting kinetic friction, which is always less. Kinetic is always less than static. Why? Because think, when it's static, it's just dead weight, right? Like, you have nothing to help you. You have to apply all the force to get it to move. Kinetic friction, the object's already moving, so it has some momentum already, right? So now its own momentum is going to want to keep it moving. It helps you overcome that friction. But when it's static friction, there's nothing to help you. You're applying all the force. Follow that? Now, not all friction's bad. We always think about friction like the stuff that wears out our car's engine, right? We prefer that did not happen. That's why we have to add oil and stuff to our engines. But think, where's the example of friction that would be helpful?
Making electricity.
Okay, in what regard? I mean, could be
I don't know, like how I've seen where people bike
Okay.
on a bike and hook it up to something and create
So it's like a generator? Good, perhaps? Yep.
Lighting a match.
Sure. When I strike a match, right, I want there to be some friction because that's that friction that ignites the match. Think, when you're driving, do you want any friction?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe not in your car's engine, but you certainly want friction between your tires and the road, right? In that case, it's like a helpful friction. We actually have a different name for it. We call it traction, right? That's why if you hit like an icy patch, you went from like a rough road to all of a sudden a really smooth patch of ice, you'll start to slide, right? Because now all of a sudden smooth surface, you don't have the friction you once did, the traction you once did. So, think, what are 3 ways that we can reduce friction? Imagine there was a really heavy box in here, right? Or a really heavy tool chest, and you need to move it. Let's say it's just sitting flat on the floor. Give me one way that you can make it easier to move.
Wheels.
Sure, add wheels to it. That's why you see wheels on most carts and benches, right? It'd be a lot harder to move if they didn't have wheels. Perhaps reduce weight, but assuming we can't change the object itself. But yes, otherwise that would be helpful. So add wheels. There'll still be the friction. It's just going to make it so it's like gravity is helping us, but there'll still be the same amount of friction.
Like something smaller under it, like reduce the amount of surface area it has on the ground.
Okay, you would think surface area would reduce the friction, but it actually just makes more friction on the parts that are touching. The friction's always about the same. I like where you're going now. Imagine you're walking along, right? What could you, if you, like, what could happen to make you slip if you stepped in? Okay, ice, why is ice more slippery than the sidewalk? Okay, so the sidewalk's rough and the ice is smooth, right? So you could perhaps smooth the two surfaces that are in contact. Like you could, if you're like trying to slide a box. You ever seen curling? You know what curling is? Olympic sport, right? You always see like those. You know what curling is? Like take a little round, like looks like shuffleboard.
Then don't they like?
Yeah, and they got like little brooms out front of it, sweeping, right? What are they doing there? They're smoothing the ice in front of that curling stone. When they smooth it, it reduces the friction and it helps it go farther. If they don't want it, if they want to like slow down, they stop sweeping. So yeah, we could smooth the surface. I think what's the third way? So we have wheels, smooth surface, or think your car's engine. What do we put in it? Yeah, we lubricate it, right? Certainly, if you step on a wet spot on the floor, that's why we have all those signs like wet floor, like they mopped or something, right? Because water can be a lubricant. Certainly, if someone like spilled like cooking oil on the floor, it would be very slippery. So, if we want to actually reduce friction, those are the only three ways that we can do it. We can certainly apply a lubricant, like an oil or a grease, or sometimes even water can be the lubricant. We can convert it from like sliding to rolling friction, or we make the surfaces smoother. So certainly, if you've ever had anything, anything we put wheels on, that's why. That's why your cars have wheels and not skis, right? If we like the curling idea, make the surface smoother. Again, if you ever play with a slip and slide? You ever hit a dry patch on a slip and slide? All right, you're just like, okay. All of a sudden, you don't have that lubricant anymore, and now you get like a floor burn. Okay. So with that, that's all for that. We've gone through, that was actually section, what? I think 2 and 3. Yeah, 2 and 3. So, all I want you to do, the section review for section 2 is page 127. 9 questions. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes. Then I want to go through it with our last 10 minutes. Okay? If you are, get these done first. If you need to like show me your car that can go a meter, if you didn't get time to show it on Monday, we can do that, when you finish or toward the end of the hour. But otherwise, page 127, 9 questions. Like I said, I'll give you about 15 minutes, and then we'll just run through them.
Can I grab my phone?
I saved.
You should remember, bring it with you. How about you have the online book too? Today only.
Yeah, we'll start bringing it.
Oh, perfect.
Page is it?
127.
You have to put the cart.
It is?
Stuff on that. It's off.
What was the page?
127.
God, do you not trust me?
No, I don't. No. It's ice.
You said all of them?
Don't forget too, as far as like, if you need to show me the rubber band card thing, but also the little write-up is due tonight, so I wanna just take a minute and double check. I think most people have already turned it in, but just maybe double check, make sure you did. You're good. Blue classroom.
Like you just need to do a question.
I did. Isn't happening like that?